All right. Welcome, everyone, to this week's episode of our show, True Data Ops. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. Each week, we're going to bring you a podcast covering all things data ops with the people that are making data ops what it is today. Now, today, I'm very happy to have my special guest, expert Data Vault practitioner, certified Data Vault bootcamp instructor, my good friend, Cindi Meyersohn. She's the president and founder of Data Rebels and the Chief Operating Officer of DataOps Alliance Holdings. Welcome to the show, Cindi.
Thank you, Kent. It's good to be here with you, as always.
Yeah, I really appreciate you taking the time out of your very busy schedule, globe hopping, teaching people about Data Vault to join us today and talk about our topic here. But so for the folks that are listening and watching today that don't know too much about you, could you give us a little bit about your background in data management and how you got to where you are today with Data Rebels and DataVault Alliance?
Sure. So I've been in IT, believe it or not, since the late 70s. I was introduced to the world of IT through Wang systems. A lot of people
I was
really
too.
know, right? And I just fell in love with technology as a result of that. So I've been a network engineer. I worked with Banyan and Novell and IBM Token Ring networks. That's sort of where I got into the networking aspects and the engineering aspects of, if you will, data and networking. I moved into web development in the mid to late 80s, and then got into COTS, commercial off-the-shelf type systems, PeopleSoft specifically, product integration and development. My most recent experience prior to starting Data Rebels was spending about 17 years or so inside the Department of Defense intelligence community, working both non-mission and mission level solutions, sort of architecture and analytics work. And in the midst of all this, I earned my undergrad in information systems and my master's in systems engineering, for those of you who care. And that's about when I discovered the Data Vault system of business intelligence. So that put me on a completely different pathway. It's allowed me to sort of meet some really brilliant minds and some wonderful people. So I started Data Rebels in about 2017 to provide education and training in Data Vault 2 methodology and to coach and guide businesses in becoming self-sufficient in building their analytic solutions. So in about 2019, Dan Lindstedt, the inventor of Data Vault, creator of Data Vault, invited me to become the Chief Operating Officer for DataOps Alliance Holdings. DVA is the holder of the Data Vault 2 solution intellectual property and the DV2 standards rules and recommended best practices. Our focus is on growing and innovating the Data Vault 2 solution through rigorous testing, which is how it came out of Lockheed Martin in the first place, and adherence, I would say, to sound engineering principles. So.
Yeah, and it's the Data Vault World and the Worldwide Data Vault Consortium Conference in Vermont, I think, is where you and I met a bunch of years ago when it's like pre Snowflake and pre a lot of other things. But I didn't know about the Wang thing, because that turns out that was I learned to program on a little desktop, before they were called desktop, Wang standalone computer in my high school. And
wow!
That's how my math teacher talked the school board into letting him buy the very first computer for the school district. And I remember it had like zero memory to program in it. We programmed in BASIC. I had to put a floppy disk into the thing to upload the BASIC operating system so that we could write the program, and then had to save the program to the disk. In order to run a program, you had to put that disk back in, load it into what little memory was there, and then you could run the program. But it really couldn't store anything. It had no disk drive as we know it today. So that's how I got started as well, was specifically with a Wang.
That's funny. Yeah. Small world, Ken.
Yeah, well, it's amazing how much our industry has changed since you and I started doing these things in the late 70s. From something before the IBM PC even existed, and
Yeah.
what we worked with, and how little memory it had, how little space it had, and what we had to do to actually make anything happen. Post punch card, but not quite, into what people think of as a desktop computer even. So that's good. I just learned something new from you already today. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So, we're of course here on the True Data Ops podcast, and so we want to talk about data ops. So I'm really interested in your perspective on, how do you define data ops, and really where does it fit in our modern data space?
As I was looking through, sort of your data ops website when we were talking, and of course, some of the conversations I've had with Doug Needham on these things. So, from my perspective, I would say data ops is sort of a combination of the principles from the Agile Manifesto. Then they're implemented through data ops pragmatically to bring the business value, right, in data operations and analytics. So it's about, I believe, it's about delivering business focused quality, governance, and management to data through collaborative partnerships, with the business or with the mission, so that you get these results in a repeatable, optimized, set of processes. So, we want to make sure that the processes break complexity, and that's what I'm seeing with what you guys are doing. They break the complexity into these bite-sized chunks or data products that are well tested, interoperable, highly performant, and reusable. So that's how I see data ops running.
Yeah, and it's you and I both have the background in Agile, and that's part of what I saw. And as we're kind of evolving how we deal with data, we started trying to, it's like, well, can we apply the Agile Manifesto? It was designed for software. And so now we've moved into this space of, okay, taking it the next step is how do we apply some of these other principles in the data space and make it work? So, and this is a big question that I get all the time from people that I consult with, and you probably get the same thing too. Is it possible still today to deliver value at the scale that we're doing now from data if we're not adopting some form of agile or using something like data ops and true data ops? Where do we stand with that? Do corporations really need to kind of jump into this even more so than they had in the past?
Well, we were sort of talking about this earlier. And if I have to be honest, I would say, yeah, it can be done, right? Because if I were to say, no, you can't do it without Agile or some form of data ops, right? That sort of denies the fact that many teams have been doing it. So I think the real question is whether or not we can deliver optimum value, optimization, if we're not agile and following some form of data ops. And the answer to that question is no, because outside of agile ways of working, the time it takes to optimize exceeds, in my opinion, the value of the data at the end of the pipeline. So some of that has to do with data aging, and the value of data as it ages over time. You'll have people that will argue that the older data is, the least valuable it becomes. And I would say that depends. All right. If you're looking
Yeah.
at prediction, you need to understand what the trends are over time. So it really depends on the application. And then other aspects have to do with lost opportunity, if you will. So those are the things I would look at. It's an optimization will help you with that.
Right. Yeah. Because obviously there's we have a long history in our industry, and so there's people have been successful before Agile existed and before
Yeah.
these concepts of true data ops existed. But yeah, I like the way your perspective on that, putting it are we getting the optimum value, right? And really the lost opportunities is we talk a lot about what's the time to value, right? I'm trying to reduce that amount of time that we deliver value from the data. And for certain types of data sets, if we start talking near real-time data and operational analytics, well, yeah, it's 24 hours is too long in some cases, right? If we're trying to,
Right.
in healthcare, right? We're doing IoT devices. We're getting healthcare information and monitoring for patients. Well, that needs to pretty much be real time, right? Otherwise, it really could be a life and death situation, and way worse than a lost opportunity in that case. So yeah, how do we get there? Now, you and I have both consulted with a lot of companies over the last number of years.
Long time. Let's not put a date on that.
Yeah, it's been a while. But we have challenges in getting people to change the way they do things, and so want to hear from you, your perspectives and experience on what are some of the barriers to becoming more agile, and that's agile with a little a, so that we can reduce the time to value.
I would say people and organizations are the greatest barrier. I don't think the business in general really understands on a larger scale what being agile means. And I think the technical teams look at the ceremonies without unnecessarily, I would say, applying the concepts of agile. I also think that most teams are unclear on the ties between the objective of being agile and its direct relationship to the capability maturity model integration, which is basically, the purpose of that is to affect process improvement by developing risk reducing behaviors inside the team, across services, across products and software development. I think that's where I think the teams sometimes lose the why and the connection between CMMI, which is the grandfather of all things agile. So, in an analytic solution, it's actually a software development project, and or a program more likely, right? Because it goes on and on. There's never,
It's not
you're
a
never
project.
finished.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so, it ought to follow a software development process, which is precisely, what the Agile Manifesto was created for. So these agile ways of working are critical to actually. We go back to optimization, right? And so how do you get a team to work in an optimized fashion? So that's
and I think that is certainly one of the challenges we see is that people keep thinking there's a technology solution, and while technology may enable us to be more agile and enable us to apply the principles of true data ops, it's the people and the processes and organizational structures and organizational culture that really you've got to work around that to be successful, because you have the best technical product in the world, but if you don't know how to use it right, and you say you're not doing process improvements, and you're just following your same old approach with a cool tool, you're not necessarily going to get that the improvement that you're looking for, and you have, again, the lost opportunity sorts of things happening.
Yeah, well, process improvement too. I mean, a lot of people, it's just like if you put a system diagram up on a logical data flow, they start thinking in terms of, technology. But, agile process improvement has to do with, measuring your team's success, which it's not about, when I say process improvement, it's not necessarily about the technology writing more efficient code or, developing a pipeline that's more highly efficient. It's how does your team work together? It's that people piece of it. There's a process to that as well. And, with the whole concept of agile and agility, we talked about optimization earlier, but you can only optimize if you measure. And so in Data Vault, one of the things we talk about with people, process, and technology, for example, is that the team needs to understand how to measure its efficiencies. It's not just about how many errors are in the code or the quality of the data and things like that. It's about how is a team working together and how can they optimize their ways of working to, accelerate delivery, if you will. So there's a lot of pieces to it when you say people, process, and technology. And I think as technologists, we tend to go down that quick systems path, right? It's an easy way to draw an analogy there, but it's about the team.
Yeah. So, do you have any quick tips for organizations to kind of improve the maturity of how they're dealing with data and their data practice?
So I would say, first of all, you and I have been around. We've seen the industry go around and around. New label, same concept over time, and sometimes I think the tendency is to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. Unfortunately, over time, things appear to be old. And I actually believe that when a business can sort of embrace, if you will, or incorporate the concept of, CMMI for development in an incremental approach, that's going to actually mature the business or the enterprise overall. What I've witnessed in my career is this whole concept of boil the ocean, this approach to data management, tying in data governance and data asset value and master data and all of this all together. And you have all these like people spinning up very quickly to sort of boil the ocean, if you will. I think if we take a holistic assessment of, CMMI implementation, you start at level one, with this initial, set of immature processes, even within your teams that are, sort of unpredictable, poorly controlled, more reactive than proactive type of ways of working together. And we begin to move through this maturity curve with our teams, and we become more proactive rather than reactive, right? And we move through this maturity curve up to a level 5 to optimization through measurement on the different pieces that the team is working on. So we're optimizing our ways of working, what Scott Ambler calls the wow of a team. So when the team hits level 5, then that iterative process is focused on innovation and process improvement, and that's where we want to be. So I think that over time, as a business begins to operate along that CMMI maturity curve and incrementally build out and develop their teams, that's where I think you'll see data management as a practice mature inside of a business.
Yeah, and I think one of the key points here is you're talking through this sort of a true maturation process and growth of an organization and team as they learn, is that people really need to realize this is not something that's going to happen overnight. If you have
Yeah.
a very immature process and you've never done Agile or anything remotely like Agile, or had a standard methodology, that it's not going to be an overnight thing. You can't just like snap your fingers and okay, we're doing true data ops and we're agile and we're delivering value in 2 weeks. No, no, we got to set the right expectations that
Yeah.
it is a growth process. It's an education process before we can get to that level, and it may take a little time to get there. But once you get there, then yeah, when you've optimized your ways of working, then yeah, the Scott's wow factor, that's where it kicks in. It's like, never imagined we could actually deliver so much so fast, but
Yeah.
you gotta get there, right?
Yeah, you sometimes hear people say, you need to slow down to go fast.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
this is one of those situations. You need to slow down and make sure the whole team is caught up to the concepts that you're moving for. The whole team understands the importance, if you will, of measurement, so that because if you don't, I've worked with teams before where they're like, well, we want to improve or accelerate in our delivery, and I said, well, did you capture your baseline? Which is, oh yeah, we forgot to measure that. I said, so if you
What are
don't
you
know where you
comparing yourself
started,
to?
how do you know you've improved, right?
Yeah,
So that measurement is critical to that. So I always tell them, capture your baseline, especially when we start with new, if you will, say with a new project team or something. And the thing about capturing metrics on a team, in an agile team, is that it's okay to change the metrics you're capturing. Like if the metrics you're capturing aren't working for you, it's okay to drop metrics and pick up different ones, right? Different ways of measuring. That's agile as well, right? So what is working and what isn't? Anyway,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Well, okay. As you know, we have the 7 pillars of true data ops. And for those who want to look that up, that's at truedataops.org. you can look it up and read the philosophy and see the 7 pillars in detail. But what I wanted to hear from you, Cindi, is looking at those 7 pillars, which one, if you had to pick one, do you think is kind of the most interesting and useful for people to be successful?
So I thought when I was looking through those, the one that resonated with me the most, really, because kind of got my head spinning on some things, was the ELT piece and the I would say lowercase LT piece, right? For that matter. If I think about like massive data reutilization capabilities, I think about auditability and scalability and resiliency, right? ELT is just sort of I would say the secret sauce to some of that, right? If I look at data ops and that approach to, little t LT, right? And the requirement for supporting the principles of data governance, data auditability, and lineage, then you have to take into account the need to sort of preserve the history of the changes over time, right? There's this perfect synergy, I would say, between data ops, ELT, that pillar, and the Data Vault solution, in that Data Vault wholly embraces these supporting principles. We separate the business keys, or if you want to say conceptual integration points, from business key relationships, which are the applied business rules, actually, from historical sort of time variant descriptive data. We use this 100% insert driven approach. In other words, zero changes. You guys talk about near zero changes, but using things like a satellite, which is where we capture our time variant descriptive data, historical data, we have zero changes to the historical data, and the ability to physically separate it, that descriptive data, by type. We can also meet those security, privacy, regulatory policies. So I see this great synergy there. And I kind of want to keep this in mind. Hopefully we'll be able to get to this and talk about the synergy where, at Data Vault Alliance, we see this convergence, if you will, of Data Vault with Data Ops and Data Mesh on a technological platform, especially things like Snowflake, right? So I think about things like, how many times have you and I in our careers, how many times have you been asked, like, why? It's like stump the chump, right? Why do data warehouses fail? Or why have data lakes failed? Or why have data lake houses, been so challenging to stand up? And I personally believe it's because of a few fundamental reasons, starting with the attitude that, the principle, understanding of true agility has been lost in our industry. For example, CMMI framework has been viewed as old school, which I mentioned earlier. And what most people, I think, today don't necessarily realize is that, we look at this stuff and they don't realize that all of these things around CMMI and agility. CMMI is the grandfather of all things agile, and so we can't just throw that out, right? It's like throwing grandpa out the door. I hate to say it that way, but grandpa's crucial to the family unit, right? Because he understands the history, and he's gone through all of these challenges that we've had for so long in our industry, and he understands why we do things the way we do. So if we throw those principles and those disciplines out, we lose sight of that why, right? And we end up reinventing the wheel. So if I take this ELT and data ops, if we store the data in its raw form, what do we have? We have the facts. In Data Vault, we say we have a version of the facts. Data are facts. However, having one fact doesn't necessarily provide, insight necessarily. And that's why the business needs more facts, to sort of corroborate a hypothesis, if you will. And that becomes a theory for the business, and it gets tested, it becomes law, like a scientific process. In Data Vault, we say that the raw data is a version of the facts, not a version of the truth. I don't look at the data as truth, nor do I look at the combination or correlation of data and its sort of interpretation, if you will, as truth, but rather as a perspective or an optic on the facts that we're given. the data we have. So the raw data becomes the basis of analytic interpretation, interpolation, probability, moving from descriptive analytics to predictive analytics and up that maturity curve, to prescriptive analytics. But all along those pathways to maturity are these perspectives that get overlaid on top of the facts, which are the raw data. So when you store the data in its raw form, you make the facts available for massive, in my opinion, massive utility by making the data available from multiple perspectives or optics, right? Based on the business function that's using the data. So it's one of the reasons why the concepts or the theory of delivering data products, if you will, in a data mesh ecosystem is so attractive, right? So raw data, sort of affords this 100% auditability to its source. It's like, I usually tell my classes when I'm teaching, data can never say what data never said. The only way to test what the data actually said is to audit back to its source, which brings us to the manner in which the data has been captured, right, and captured at the source. So the Data Vault logical architecture separates the raw data from the business's sort of various interpretations and perspectives. And it logically separates the raw data from, if you will, information. So creating information from raw data requires the application of business rules or business logic, right? Applying business logic or business rules to data introduces complexity, right? So in DataOps, one of the things you talk about is ELT. It increases your performance, right? Because it reduces the complexity that we've had with Kimball type approaches, right? And that complexity is an antithesis, if you will, of agility, right? So the logical architectural separation of business rule application from raw data increases performance across the board in an analytic solution by reducing that complexity. When I look at DataOps, what I love is the recognition in DataOps that by storing the raw data, you fall in line with what Data Vault methodology has tested and proven true for decades. You get this highly performant, highly resilient architecture, right? And by following those principles of reduced complexity, you build an analytic solution that is extremely flexible to the business because the facts, the data is readily available to the business to be utilized in whatever fit for purpose manner is required. So that's sort of reusability, it's delivered in a resilient, flexible, highly performant, and scalable component. The more components you add, as we say in Data Vault, the more business concepts that you add, the greater, the view your business has across all of its operations,
Right.
Which is what the business has been asking for decades, right?
Yes.
Yes. So if we take this idea, and this was what I was sort of noodling through, and I was like, if we take this idea of raw, data being preserved from the source operational systems, no matter where they are, because remember, Data Vault is completely platform and technology independent, just like DataOps. You can begin to think about, well, what if we don't have to move the data? What if we build our operational systems on top of a Data Vault to say foundational logical process and data model? That's kind of an interesting, approach. And I think you've done something like this, right? So we look at the predictions of global creation of data, right? In the next 2 years, like 2025, they're estimating something like 180 zettabytes of data. Now, Dan, I don't know if you heard him, but back in 2018, Dan Lindstedt talked about the fact that data is simply going to get too big to move. So understanding that this is a fact, right? How do we design systems that are scalable and resilient, performant, flexible, auditable? And at Data Vault Alliance, we're looking at this very closely in the lab, if you will, based on the work Dan did 15, 20 years ago with technologies like Snowflake, and operations like DataOps that you have. You sort of get, caught up with, if you will, some of the visions that Dan had back, 10, 20 years ago. And his more current vision, like in 2018, talking about data being too big to move, of where the Data Vault 2 methodology can really serve business and analytics in our industry in general. So we have the capability of building operational on Snowflake and application systems, right, on top of a Data Vault 2 solution so that
Mhm.
we don't have to move the data in order to reassemble it for analytic optimization. So if you want to talk about, streaming analytics, what if you don't have to move the data at all? And you can virtualize the information outcomes by implementing business rules on top of the raw data that never has to get moved. You only move data physically if performance dictates you must. So building an operational or an application system on top of a properly built Data Vault 2 solution enables the enterprise, in my opinion, to move away from having to, sort of land data multiple times, right? And then it moves the data warehouse toward, I would say, true virtualization. And I think that is really cool. And you need data ops in place to accomplish this. There's no other way to do it. You have to work in an agile fashion. All right. And so it's not a fly by the seat of your pants type solution. It requires truly agile software development approaches to achieve this rapid incremental business value, right? And this business sort of build out of the enterprise, right? But it can certainly be done.
Yeah, that's
A
everything you
mouthful,
just said
sorry.
there. Wow, that was a lot. It's a lot to
Sorry.
digest, but it really gets to, our pillar of ELT and the spirit of
Yeah.
ELT.
Yeah.
I mean, you really just articulated a whole bunch of really good reasons for that. The whole idea of not moving the data, not landing the data multiple times, that's, get it where it can be supported, and then be able to project multiple perspectives, as you called it, on it,
Yeah.
whether it be for analytics, for data science, for machine learning, and it's all auditable, which is another one of the pillars in data ops. That if we really approach it, like I said, from a fundamental principles perspective first, rather than a technology perspective,
Yeah.
there's it's easy to see how far you could potentially go with this, and like you say, build something that's resilient and robust. It's not going to break over time because you hit some sort of a limit. Thankfully, tools like Snowflake and the cloud have eliminated a lot of the hard limits that we used to have to deal with, that we had to do these weird things to kind of end around it. And that's kind of why, that pillar there of seeing the spirit of ELT is part of it.
Yeah.
And it goes back to one of the principles of Agile, of minimizing the amount of work not done. And I remember years ago when I first started teaching about Agile in the data world, my main example was, oddly enough, this: don't write ETL code that you don't need to write. Right. And that leads us into this virtualization concept of, land the data and use the data using virtualization techniques, using views, things like that, in a highly performant platform. So, you don't have to QA code that you never wrote. And that's, as you and I both experienced through our careers, is like ETL code broke more often than probably anything else. You had two main problems. You ran out of space on the hardware. Okay, we've solved that problem thanks to the cloud. And the ETL code, which we now call data pipeline code, broke because somebody didn't understand the requirements, or the business rules changed. Hence, the ETL and spirit of ELT, of loading the data, the raw data, and keeping that. Then when those rules change downstream, we can make those changes, but we're not having to reload the data. It's all still there, and that allows us to be so much more agile.
Yeah, it's all part
Well,
of that multiple utility.
yeah. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Doug is chiming in here. The most efficient query is one that is never run. Yes, absolutely, Doug. Yep. That's right up there. Yep. We minimize the amount of work not done. Yep. You can't be any more efficient than not running the query. And if you don't have to
Exactly.
run it to move it or change it, that's awesome. All right. Well, we've kind of run out our time. It's been great, Cindi. I think we're going to have you back to have some more conversations about this interplay of the Data Vault 2.0 methodology and true data ops, and data mesh. I think there's so much there that we can unpack. That we just can't do it in one podcast. So my closing question for you is that the one I ask all my guests, just to have slightly different flavor here, is if you weren't doing data and all these things with Data Vault and everything that you've done, what would you be doing?
So my dream has always been to have an organic farm.
Okay.
And actually, to have a huge apiary. I'd love to have orchards, and I am super passionate about bees, believe it or not, in our bee population. So I took a class at Penn State a few years back on apiaries and how to take care of bees and stuff. So if I weren't traveling so much, I'd have one right now. I'd have a couple of hives. But yeah, I'd love to get into organic, sustainable farming and doing things to support the bee population.
Oh, very cool. That sounds like a lot of fun to do that, and it's important for people to do that sort of thing. I'm with you on the bee population as well. My wife has a garden, and we know we've got to have those. We got to have a good bee population out there to pollinate the fruit trees, and otherwise, we don't have food to eat. So
that's right.
Very, very important.
Pollinators. We love pollinators.
Yes. Well, thank you. Thank you very much for being my guest today, Cindi, and taking time out of your schedule to come on with us and talk about these things. I think it's really important for us to get a lot of perspectives on this. Thanks everyone for joining this week and listening in. Next week, my guest is going to be analyst, consultant, and thought leader, Mike Ferguson. That should be a great conversation. He's another one of the contributors to the True DataOps philosophy and a co-author and editor on our book, DataOps for Dummies. So you're not going to want to miss that conversation with Mike. So until next week, everyone, have a great week.
Thanks for having me, Kent.